Annenberg Media.
Additional funding was provided by this and other public television stations and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
To me, this place captures the essential paradox of Africa's location. You know, it's the most central of all the continents of the world. Not far from here, the equator cuts the African continent into two almost equal halves. No other region of the world is traversed by the equator in quite that manner. It is the middle continent by any standards, sitting next to what Europeans call the Middle East. And yet, the majority of our people have lived in relative historical isolation in their villages. And now, colonialism and underdevelopment have added to our problems. This most central of all continents has been pushed to the very periphery of world affairs. For the Africans, this need not be so. It hasn't always been so. In the beginning was water, and the water was of God, and the water was God. Along the banks of the great rivers, many Africans have believed in the sacredness of the waters. Some created shrines to their honor. On the Nile, well before Christ, Africans built the temple of the river goddess Isis. The world's longest river helped the ancient Egyptians construct the world's first grand civilization. It's part of the epic story of how geography can be the mother of history. Our concern in this program is about this link between geography and history, about the moral order of this continent, and how it has been shaped and shaken by the natural scheme of things. Coastlines the world over are often receptive to the winds of foreign influence. On Africa's eastern seaboard, conquerors have risen and fallen, and some have left their mark. Often the Western impact is the most obvious. But don't be deceived. Islam was affecting African values 1,000 years before European colonialism. A legacy of different lifestyles was evolving. The ocean winds brought to Africa new gods, new goods, new games. At Fort Jesus in Mombasa, I played football as a child. Once my own family ruled Mombasa from this very fort. Fort Jesus was built by the Portuguese, conquered by the Arabs, and then by the British. Our dynasty lasted about a century. We were part of the historical saga of a seaport. As I grew up, history transmitted its messages in more than one language. My mother tongue was Kiswahili, but at school in colonial Kenya, we were taught in English. And the muezzin summoned believers to the mosque in the language of worship, Arabic. When I lived in this house, the muezzin was a neighborhood muezzin. He didn't just call believers to prayer from a minaret. He actually came to this window, shouting at 5 o'clock in the morning, prayer, prayer. Prayer is better than sleep. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Hundreds of times I prayed here. The mosque was both a temple of solemn worship and an academy of sacred scholarship. The place still has echoes of more than 1,000 years of Muslim learning. The geography of my birth made me a walking example of 3 cultures, Africa's triple heritage: traditional Africa, Islam, and the West. To pursue one of those civilizations, I took a train from Mombasa in 1955 on the first leg of my journey to study and later teach in the West. Western transportation was shrinking distance for Africans and spreading not only Western ideas, but Islamic and African ones as well. Our journey in this television series is an exploration of these 3 legacies on African soil, the triple heritage. The most African force at work in the continent is nature itself. Its impact is written right across our history. But nature has also given Africa a unique role in the history of the world. Nature, in its infinite wisdom, has made Africa the cradle of mankind. The sea may have given birth to simple life, but the African continent hosted the birth of man in all his complexity. Nature itself has been the grand excavator in this part of East Africa, digging away across the centuries and revealing layers of life, generations of time. The remains of some of the earliest human beings have been found here. You know, it's strange how the march of science has often affected the image of Africa in the world. In the 19th century, it was the discoveries in biology, the theorizing, the legacy of Charles Darwin, which helped to downgrade the status of Africans. They were demoted into a species that was supposed to be below the human level. And now, in the 20th century, archaeology is helping to restore the balance by demonstrating that the earliest man was in fact African. Cattle might have been imported into Africa, maize was imported into Africa, but man is indigenous to Africa. Man is native to the core. Africa is also the birthplace of human culture, a relationship worked out with nature. Africa is where human institutions began. The etiquette of eating, the ethics of mating, the rules of behavior were all evolving out of basic human needs. A moral code of conduct was emerging out of the interplay with nature. With nature's colors from plants and limestone, man painted his body before he painted on rock. The history of aesthetics is linked to the history of cosmetics, and both can be traced to Africa. But why was the mother of all culture so secretive about itself? Well, partly because the societies which emerged here were self-contained. Africa didn't advertise itself. Africans felt close to nature. They had almost a theology of nearness, which emphasized that what was near was dear. One of the great forces of modern history has been interest in the horizon, in what lies beyond the horizon. It is this interest which produced great explorers, great conquerors, Christopher Columbus, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, the great European adventurers that traversed the seas and so-called discovered new lands. One of the gaps in Africa's experience has been the relative absence of this interest in what lies beyond the horizon. There are no real, mute, inglorious Nelsons coming from Africa. There are no real adventurers seeking new lands to conquer. On the other hand, this may deepen the humanity of Africa. It portrays Africans as a people interested in the oceans for the sustenance it provides, rather than for the access it furnishes towards subjugating others. Yet the sea is more than a provider. In Senegal, it helps define the roles of men and women. Again, nature is wedded to culture. By tradition, African man is the hunter. He confronts the storm and the shark. What is not traditional is restricting women to the kitchen. African woman is a miracle of versatility. Mother, cultivator, market woman, and negotiator. Women all over Africa are at least as central to the economy as men. and certainly more so than most Western women. Who says nature intended women to be just homemakers? Certainly not indigenous Africa. For centuries, the interior of the world's largest island, Africa, maintained its privacy protected by the oceans, by the climate, and by the mythology of a dark and terrifying continent. Africa's environment shielded Africa's authenticity, keeping foreign influences at bay, but not always successfully. It was in the 7th century of the Christian era that a new cry was heard in Africa for the first time. Allahu Akbar. God is great. It was a cry which echoed from wall to wall, town to town, oasis to oasis. The Arabs had arrived. Somali children learning the words of their prophet, going back 14 centuries. There are some 200 million Muslims in Africa, about half of the total population of this continent. It was in North Africa that the Arabs first proclaimed their mission. Two processes got underway. One was the transmission of the Arabic language, and the other was the spread of the Islamic religion. Here in North Africa, both processes were very successful indeed. Christianity, which used to thrive in these oases before the Arabs arrived, has almost completely disappeared, and the Arabic language has changed the identity of the people here. But for the 100 million Muslims south of the Sahara, it is the Islamic religion which has been adopted, not the Arabic language as a native tongue. To paraphrase an English poet, no culture is an island entire unto itself. Therefore, never send to know for whom the muezzin calls. He calls for thee. Against all odds, nature made arid sand the birthplace of one of the great forces of world history. Islam emerged from the Arabian desert, inspired by the poetry of grand desolation. The dust of history rises in the trail of this 20th century vehicle. It is traversing a route along which camel caravans have crossed the Sahara before. The drought-ridden areas of the Middle East and Africa are fertile ground for the message of Muhammad. To people in dry lands, what is heaven if not abundance of water? Muhammad's image of heaven enchants the wretched societies of thirst. The Islamic paradise has rivers of all kinds flowing under it, the dream of a clean natural fountain, the bliss of a wet eternity.
يقولون سلام عليكم ادخلوا الجنة بما كنتم أكبر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم نشرح.
If nature helped the spread of Islam in Africa, it also added limits. Where the camel and the horse couldn't go, there Islam was often arrested. Where Islam did penetrate, it brought many Africans their first encounter with the discipline of the clock. Muslims have to pray 5 times a day at set hours. Arabs and Africans may not always be punctual with other human beings, but it is a sin to keep God waiting. Then there is the culture of the campus. Since Muslims at prayer have to face Mecca in faraway Saudi Arabia, someone has to find out which way Mecca is. A new sense of direction came with Islam. But who decided that Mecca was not in Africa, that Islam was not an African religion? It's a question of where Africa ends, a problem posed particularly sharply at the Suez Canal. Normally, the western side of the Red Sea is regarded as Africa, while the eastern side is Arabia. But who decreed that? Who determined that the Arabian Peninsula was not part of our continent? Well, 2 vastly different forces played a major part in that decision. One was a natural cataclysm which occurred 5 million or more years ago, created the Rift Valley, and tore off the Arabian Peninsula from its mother continent except for the Isthmus of Suez. That occurrence by itself would not have made the separation between Arabia and the African continent as we know it today acceptable and permanent. An additional factor was needed. Here comes the second force, European power. European power and European preeminence in map-making decided that Africa ended at the Red Sea and not at the Gulf which separated Arabia from Iran or Persia. The final act of the story occurred in the 19th century. You see, if the world had consisted of configuration of power that was different, the Arabs on the 2 sides of the Red Sea could have been discussing a tunnel or a bridge to unite them, or a high road of a special kind across the Isthmus of Suez. But the world was European dominated. And what was important was not increased traffic between Arabia and Africa, it was increased traffic between Europe and the rest of the world. And so the Suez Canal was constructed. An estimated 120,000 Egyptians lost their lives in the building of that canal. A natural cataclysm which had occurred 5 million years previously and torn off the Arabian Peninsula from the rest of Africa was now completed here at Suez through its canal.
The most beautiful place I've ever been in Africa is what we used to call the Belgian Congo, without a doubt.
Where'd you go?
Well, it was 1959, I know, because we had to hurry back for a wedding.
And that manager of that hotel, whatever his name was, he said, you must go to the top of this hill and have a look at the Six Peninsulas, what it was. It was a super sight. Or was it 10, I can't remember.
Europeans had now come into Africa, the third force of our triple heritage. That unrelenting interplay between geography and history continued. Climate and environment helped to determine where Europeans settled and redesigned their lives.
Dudu's our cook now.
Can we make a good living where we're going? How high is the land? How rich? Are there mosquitoes? Southern and Eastern Africa were favorite areas for white settlement. The pursuit of the white man's dream was truly underway.
Did you see some pygmies, Vera?
Yes, did we not? Have you seen them?
No, never.
Oh, Ian, you have.
I haven't, I promise you.
Oh, you should.
I got some photographs of the pygmies.
They had these bows and arrows, and then they put a cigarette on a tree, quite a way away, and then they did that, you know, with their arrows, and they got it every time.
British families worked out their own strategies of recreating a new Britain abroad. Winds of the world give answer.